Tonight I want to talk to you about the book of Proverbs. A few selections from the book that we'll take a look at. And then, but first we're going to talk about just the book as a whole. The book of Proverbs is an interesting book because it really is a national collection of proverbs of the Hebrew people. The Middle Eastern people in particular placed a great deal of trust and confidence in the sayings of their forefathers. They referred to these as proverbial sayings. And a great many of the ancient people were just exactly like that. And so at various times, these ancient people would gather some of these great proverbs together, these great thoughts of some of their important people, and they would gather them together, and children would memorize them, adults would memorize them, and they were bound together sometime in books or booklets. Well, that's a little bit the way the Hebrew people were as well. They had wise people. As a matter of fact, a number of the Psalms read a great deal like some of the Proverbs read. And this really is a collection of things. We generally think of the Proverbs as the work of Solomon. And certainly some of them are the work of Solomon, and we'll come to a place where it will say that the Proverbs of Solomon are concluded. But then there are other men who also wrote parts of the book of Proverbs. The fact is, we don't know just exactly what was written by Solomon and what was not written by Solomon, except from some notations like that as we go along. Well, what does the book of Proverbs deal in? Well, it deals in some characters, some different people, young men, and it instructs young men about some things to do and some things not to do. And then it talks about the fool. The fool acts this way and does this way. So it talks a little bit about the foolish person. The word fool to us today just means a foolish person. A person who does foolish things. And so we add ISH to it and we call them foolish. The original language carried with it a much deeper idea than this. A fool was not just somebody who did a stupid thing. A fool was a worthless person, a person that had no value to him, a person who was consistently doing the wrong things, the dumb things and the foolish things, but he was an arrogant individual. He was a person who other people, when they called him a fool, that meant you are not worth anything to anybody under any circumstances. This is the reason that Jesus says, don't call a person a fool. Now, the way we use the term was not the way Jesus used the term, or the way the term was used back in the Old Testament. If you notice in the 5th chapter of Matthew there, where it says, don't call a person a fool, he also says, don't say to anyone, raka, or reka, as it's been said. Why? Well, these terms are very closely related, not in the words themselves, but they're closely related in the meaning. Fool means you are a worthless person. When you say raka, you're saying to this person what we would say, you are a stupid blockhead. Okay? And so both of these terms are reflections on the creation of God. Because no matter who he is, he may be a stupid blockhead in my opinion. He may be a fool, a worthless person in my opinion. But he's made in the image of God. He is a creation of God. And so Jesus was talking not about just doing foolish things, a person who does foolish things. He was talking about a person that other people are thinking of as a worthless person. Now, how is the word used here in this book of Proverbs? Well, it's used pretty much in that sense. The worthless person. The person who has no value to the society. Here are some things that he does. So the book of Proverbs deals with the fool. It deals also with rich people. It deals with the poor people. It deals with the young people. and it deals with old people. So there are a lot of characters in the book of Proverbs. It doesn't give us a narration of these people, but it says, here are some characteristics of some of these people. And then the book also deals in some animals. Now, I don't know whether you want to call this thing an animal or not, but it talks about the rabbits. That's an animal. But it also talks about the ant. One of my favorite passages in Proverbs is the 6th chapter where he talks about the lowly little ant. He talks about a number of different kinds of animals. The ant is going to be the one that we'll talk about a little bit tonight. Well, now there's something on the other side of the fool, and he contrasts this fool with wise men and wisdom. This is really a hard term to define because a person can be educated and not be very wise. He can know many, many things and not be very wise. On the other hand, he can be an uneducated person and be a very wise person. So what is this whole idea then of wisdom? Well, it's interesting because the word is attached sometimes to animals. They're wise. Why are they wise? Well, he's going to talk about the ant, and he's not going to say the ant is a wise animal, but he is going to tell us something about the characteristics of an ant, and we have to conclude that he's talking about the fact that the ant is really a wise little creature, a wise little creature. And then one of the things that I like about the book of Proverbs is that it has some real funny things in it. My favorite one along this line is where the writer says that as a gold ring is in a swine's snout, so is a beautiful woman without discretion. Now, what about that? Now, in contrast to that, the writer constantly talks about wisdom as a female. She, her. A number of times he does this. So what is this thing of wisdom? Well, one of the connections that the writer makes all through the book is that a wise person is connected with a disciplined person. Now stop and think about that for a moment, because a wise person has to be a disciplined person. He's disciplined not because he has a mama standing over him and say, do this and don't do that. He's disciplined from within. He is self-disciplined. So it means that a wise person is not a person who wastes his time. He's disciplined about his time. He is not a person who has things to do and he doesn't do them. He's disciplined about those things. He is not a person who sets the Word of God aside, but he realizes that there is a strong discipline connected with this whole thing of the Word of God. And so wisdom seems to be, and this is a seems to be to me. Wisdom seems to be the person who knows right and wrong. He understands judgment, and he has the discipline to put those things together. And I think as we read this book, we'll find that to a good degree that holds water. We'll never see wisdom and discipline divorced. Well, another of the characters of the book of Proverbs is the father. Well, really the parents, but he talks about the father more than he does the mother. The father, this is kind of an interesting thing to me. It was called to my attention by J.P. Sanders when I was back in college and back in the late 40s and early 50s. The Old Testament assigns the training of children primarily to the father. When the children don't turn out very well, you very seldom find that the Old Testament says anything about the mother in this. It's the father. This is brought over into the New Testament, where Paul says twice, once in Ephesians and once in Colossians, where he says, fathers, provoke not your children. In one case he says that they be not discouraged. And then he says, in the other place, in Ephesians, he says, don't provoke your children to wrath, but nurture them in the chastening and admonition of the Lord. And then in Colossians he says, fathers, don't provoke your children so they won't become discouraged. And those are very important things. Well, the book of Proverbs talks about some of these things that and some of these people and animals and so forth that I've just mentioned. Let's take a look at a part of the reading for tonight. I entitled this sermon Practical Lessons or Practical Readings from the book of Proverbs. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. Now the first part here then we know is the work of Solomon. And here's what he has to say. Notice the use of wisdom here. For attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and the riddles of the wise, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. Now, this reminds me of something that we need to remember in Proverbs. Proverbs, a lot of times, uses what we call antithesis. Antithetical parallelism is what it's really called. And all that means is that he will give us a statement, and then he'll come along and he will say something opposite that. And so he says right here, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. And all through the book of Proverbs and all through the Psalms and all of the Hebrew poetry, you constantly find this antithesis and this parallelism that is used. And then sometime there will be parallels of good things. This is good, like this is also good. Okay, let's go on and read a portion of the remaining portion of this first chapter. Listen, my son, to your father's instructions, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They will be as a garland of grace around to your head, and a chain to adorn your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, come along with us. Let's lie in wait for someone's blood. Let's waylay some harmless soul. I'll get this right in a minute. Let's swallow them. Let's swallow them. I wish I had memorized this out of another version. Let's swallow them alive like the grave, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We will sort all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us, and we will share a common purse. My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot in their paths, for their feet rush to sin, and they are swift to shed blood. How useless is to spread a net in the full view of the birds. So he says, it's so obvious, isn't it, that their evil doings and they're seducing you into their evil doing. All of this is just as foolish as spreading a net in front of a bird and expecting the bird to come down and get himself caught in the net. So he says, my son, listen to your father, listen to your mother. And this is the place where he puts the two together. In the next portion of the first chapter, he says, wisdom calls aloud in the street. I've always liked this because he personifies wisdom. Wisdom is a creature. Wisdom is a person. And he says, wisdom calls out in the street. And she, wisdom is female here. She raises her voice in public squares. At the head of the noisy street she cries out. In the gateway of the city she makes a speech. And here's part of her speech. How long will you, O simple ones, love the simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? Well, he goes on and develops this even further, and he's going to talk about the temptations of young men and the terrible, terrible things of illicit, immoral sexual activities, and how the foolish fall into this. Well, none of us here is going to be tempted by that sort of thing, but we're living in a generation, we're living in a country right now where this is on the rise. I looked up some statistics just the other day about out-of-wedlock births. Back in the 1960s, out-of-wedlock births were minimal, just a very small percentage. Do you know what it is today? Out-of-wedlock births are about 45% of all births.
More than that.
More than that. More than that. Among the black people, it's way up about 70%. Now that isn't. I'm not trying to say that that's a slam against the black people, but it's a slam against our nation. And one of the things that we get out of the book of Proverbs, not just in reference to this particular thing, and by the way, you can go on the internet and you get all kind of, those statistics that I mentioned came from the Centers of Communicable Diseases in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a federal agency. But the reason that I'm mentioning this is that Proverbs deals a whole lot in this. And he says, it's foolish. It's foolish. The man, the woman who does that is not a person who is using discipline. This is not a wise thing to do. Oh, well, you got to sow your wild oats. No, you don't. No, you don't. Whatever a man sows, he's going to reap. And he doesn't need to sow his wild oats. He that sows to the wind, Job says, will reap the whirlwind. Let's go on reading. Turn to the third chapter, and let's take a look at verses 3 and 4 here. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win the favor of a good name in the sight of God and of men. Now, the ancient people had a way of expressing where to place important things. And they would wear jewelry around their neck to make them look beautiful, to adorn them. Not just the women, but the men as well. And so he said, let this be what adorns you. Let this be what people are attracted, the thing that people are attracted to. And so he says, love and faithfulness, let it never leave you. Put it on your forehead. You will gain a great name. To go on to in this chapter, let's turn to the 11th verse, please. This 11th verse of chapter 3 is quoted by the writer of Hebrews. And this is a tough one, folks. This is really a tough one. Notice what he says. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights. How many of us like punishment? Well, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, when I got out of line, I got a little spanking. Sometimes it was more than a little spanking. And I had certain chores that I had to do when I was being punished. I never did like that. I never got any punishment that I enjoyed. So the writer says here, when things go hard for you in life, and all of us have this, things go hard for all of us at one time or another. They either have or they will. And so he says, when things go hard for you, think of it in terms of God's discipline. Now, let me put a little caveat in here. I'm not trying to say, and the Bible certainly doesn't teach, that everything bad that goes wrong in your life is something God is doing to you. That's a very popular idea. The reason that such and such thing happened is because God was punishing those people. Well, looking back on it, I might be able to say, yeah, that's what it looks like. But when things are going on in my life, and I say, why am I suffering like this? Why am I unsuccessful? Why are these terrible things happening to me? Well, I can't say, God, what have I done to deserve this? But at the same time, we need to recognize two things, I think. One is, it isn't the bad things that happen to us that destroy us. It's how we respond to those bad things. And the second thing is that we can't always say that, well, it's God's will. It's God's will. Maybe it's not God's will. God's will is not done on earth as it is in heaven, not yet. And so, Carl Mitchell was talking about this one time, and he said, maybe we ought to say it's the devil's will. It's the devil's will. Because the devil is working in our lives too. And it's quite probable, I would think, that the bad things that happen to me might very well be the devil working. How do I respond to it? How do I respond to it? Now, what does it mean here? Do not despise the Lord's discipline. Well, last night I sat down and watched almost the whole thing on PBS, a documentary about the old Oklahoma Dust Bowl back in the 30s. Well, I remember some things about people talking about the Dust Bowl. I didn't understand very much about what was going on. It was an absolutely horrible thing. And the thing is, there are certain things in life that happen, and I can't control those things. There are certain things in life that happen to me that I got myself into. And now some terrible bad things are happening to me as a result of that. Then there are all the kinds of good intentions that I had, and yet they turn sour and I suffer for these things. Well, we all have these things at one time or another. We either have had, or believe me, you've got it in store for you, because it comes to every person. Now, I can't sort these out and say, that came from God, that came from the devil, that one came, I don't know where that one came from. I sort all of these things out and say, well, yes, I can see God working in this or that or the other. Very frankly, I can't see that. I do not know when God is working in a particular event. Now, there probably will be some people who, since we've had all these terrible fires right here, probably there will be some people who are religious who are saying, God is punishing those people. How do you know that? Just because bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. So what is the writer talking about here? I think that the writer is saying to us, when bad things happen, how do you respond to it? Do you respond to it in a godly way? Do you respond to it by saying, I don't know where it came from. I don't know why I'm suffering this. But God be glorified. Read the book of Habakkuk again. I've said this so many times. The book of Habakkuk has just such a wonderful ending to it, where he talks about the fact that, God, you didn't do it the way I wanted you to. God, you didn't do it the way I think it ought to be done. And the bad people are getting away with their evil, and the good people are being punished, and the whole world is just so upside down. And then God talks to him and says, I know what I'm doing, Habakkuk. I know what I'm doing. Believe me, the Chaldeans are going to be punished. Believe me, the wicked people within Israel, they're going to be punished. I know what I'm doing. My time schedule, Habakkuk, is not your time schedule. And then Habakkuk learns the lesson. And he gives this great, wonderful statement where he says, there may be no grapes on the vine. There may be no figs on the tree. There may be no calves in the stall. There may be no oxen in the barn. But he says, I still will glorify God. I think this is the idea that he has here in this 3rd and 4th verses of chapter 3. Now, let's take a look a little bit further down. Look down at chapter 3 and verse 13. It really is a continuation of this. Blessed is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gains understanding. And again, for she, wisdom, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. Oh, that's a hard one to learn, isn't it? We really want to be successful. A brother this morning, after the sermon, he said, Jack, that's exactly what I needed. And then he told me something about his situation. And he was so tired of just hearing platitudes about how you can be successful and sermons and so forth about how you can feel better about yourself and motivational things and things like that. He said, Jack, I got so tired of that. And that's the reason that I came here. And so the idea is that the person who is wise will recognize that there's a greater return. There is a greater benefit out of finding wisdom, discipline, good judgment, than in having your money invested in gold and silver. Yes, I'll have to say I kind of like that one. I want you to turn to the 6th chapter now, and we'll go to one of my favorite little passages here. I don't have trouble with ants at my house. I can leave candy out, I can leave ice cream out, I can leave anything out, sweets of any kind, and the ants just won't come. Once in a while, though, boy, they will pour in like everything, They're preparing for things. They're smart little animals, very smart. I saw 2 ants today on my kitchen counter. And of course, I was thinking of the sermon for this evening, and I thought to myself, here's a little guy. He's only, an 1/8 of an inch long. He's such a little fella. He has some kind of a nervous system. He has some kind of a brain. I don't know anything much about ants. But here's what the writer says. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer, no ruler. Yet it stores up provisions in the summer and gathers its food at the harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up and turn from your sleep? Oh, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands and rest. poverty will come to you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. Well, we got that parallelism again there, haven't we? This time it's not antithetic parallelism, but it's a parallelism where he reinforces what he has already said. Yes, poverty will come to you like a bandit, and scarcity like an armed man. What's his lesson here? What is the practical aspect of this thing that he's talking about in reference to the ant? Well, the ant doesn't have much sense. He doesn't have a very big brain. But there's something about the ant that even though he doesn't have a commander-in-chief, he doesn't have someone spanking him, trying to get him to do what's right, but somehow or another the ant knows, I've got to store up my food. Somehow or another the ants work together. And ant culture has come to be a very, very interesting kind of an undertaking. Let me tell you a true story, and I'll close with this. There was a man by the name of Dr. Argosy who lived in the 1800s. He was an Englishman, and he was a very, very well-known naturalist. And there was a woman. She was a scullery maid. She worked for her sister, and she only did the menial tasks and got minimum wage. Well, she was very interested in natural things and animals and all. And when Dr. Argosy came, she saved up her money so that when he came and made his lecture, she would be able to go. She was not dressed very well, but she went to hear Dr. Argosy. And after the lecture was over, which she was just enthralled by, people were gathered around talking to him, and they were all well dressed, and there she was, poorly dressed, not well educated. And after everybody had left, she went to Dr. Argosy and told him about how she had enjoyed his lecture. And he said, "What do you do for a living?" She said, "Well, I'm just an old scullery maid." "What do you do?" "Oh, I sit out on the porch and peel potatoes and prepare food and clean things up." He said, "What's the floor made of where you sit and do your work? You peel your potatoes?" She said, "Oh, it's a brick floor. They're just bricks are laid out there." And he said, "I'll tell you what I want you to do. I want you to go and find what's under the bricks." She said, "Why?" He said, "Just look under some of the bricks and see what you find. And then I want you to write me a letter explaining something about whatever this is you found. I want you to go to a library and research it and read about whatever it is you find." "I can't do that." I said, "Yes, you can." And he took hold of her and said, "I'm not going to let you go until you agree to write me a letter about what's under a brick." Okay, she agreed. She went back, and right in front of the chair where she had been sitting, she picked up a brick. You know what was under the brick? An ant was under the brick. Well, the first thing she had to do was write to the doctor about the bricks. So she went and took a brick to an individual who made bricks, a company. She carried the brick in and she said, "What is this?" She said, "That's a brick." She said, "No, I mean, what's it made out of?" And he went on and told her how they made bricks and so forth. And so she wrote a letter to Dr. Argosy and told him all about different kinds of bricks and how they were made and why they were made the way that they were made. He enjoyed it so much. He wrote back to her and he said, "What's under the brick?" She remembered there's an ant under the brick. And so he wanted her to write to him about ants. And she wrote this, she went to the library and researched it, and she wrote a big theme about, it was authentic, it was researched about ants and how many different kinds of ants there are and what their habits are and how they live in the colony of ants. And, oh, she made a big thing out of it. Guess what? Dr. Argosy liked it so much, he sent it to a publisher, and a publisher published it. And gave him $200 for it, and so he wrote back to her, and he sent her a check for $200. This was such a thrill to her. She began investigating all kinds of things, and she became a self-made person because she began looking at a little ant. I think that one of the things that the writer here of Proverbs has in mind is this. Discipline is attached to wisdom. The ant is so well disciplined. The ant might not in his own mind be thinking, well, winter is coming, the harvest is going to be past, I'd better get things going. But somehow or another there's an instinct there that just says, yes, this is what I have to do. I think that is the message here of this little pericope about the ant. The book of Proverbs is a wonderful book. The book of Proverbs tells us some things that are so very, very practical. It's just axiomatic things that are wise sayings, and yet when we take a look at them, we find that they have tremendous depth to them. They're really profound if we stop and take them apart. We're going to sing an invitation song. If you are in any way subject to the invitation of Christ, we invite you to come. Let's stand together and sing.